You're listening to The Map of Us, a podcast dedicated to the LGBTQ Media Mapping Project, a national study of queer local media led by Tracy Baim, with assistance from the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at City University of New York, and support from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and Local Media Association. I'm your host, Dana Piccoli, Managing Director of News Is Out, a pioneering queer media collaborative. Welcome. The Media Mapping Project documents the outlets that are still producing original LGBTQ reporting and the millions of people they serve. It also captures the financial and political pressures these publishers face, along with the surge in audience demand for queer news. We're doing this podcast to bring those findings to life and to spotlight the people who keep queer media going, often on shoestring budgets and in hostile environments. This limited podcast series will explore key topics including the economics of queer media, queer news deserts, diversifying leadership in queer journalism, and more. For this first episode, we hand things over to Alexander Rodriguez from the Los Angeles Blade. He sits down with journalist and project director Tracy Baim to talk about why this mapping effort matters, what the data reveals, and how it fits into the long history of LGBTQ media.
Tracy, I love that they paired us together. I'm a year into being the publisher of the Los Angeles Blade. You obviously have a long history in journalism. What do you think newbies like me can learn most about LGBTQ media from veterans like you?
Well, I think that in many ways, being in the LGBT press I compare it to being like an itinerant musician. We have this passion and drive to do it, but we sometimes have to do other things to make it work financially. And a lot of people have come and gone in media thinking that there's power or clout or money. And I mean a lot of different kinds of local media, not just LGBT media. And the people that are left and those who I think are starting now, the passion is what will get us through. There's a lot of economic sacrifice, but I would say the hustle is worth it because for me, I have absolutely no regrets about not working in mainstream media. Mainstream media wouldn't have me in 1984, and I'm very grateful for the rejection because it gave me a path where I could be who I am and cover the things I love and wanted to. Early years, of course, that was a lot of sadness, but it was also a lot of triumph around changing government and changing policy around HIV/AIDS and gay rights. So I just have always felt this passion to make sure our community has a voice from those who are most marginalized to those in power.
Well, thank you for sharing that. All right, let's just get right into it. LGBTQ Media Mapping Project, launched in 2024. How did this project come about? What was that moment of inspiration that was like, now is the time?
Well, I had done a book called Gay Press, Gay Power over a decade ago, and I was very curious. It was already getting pretty desperate back then, but I was curious where we were at now. And when News Is Out launched as a collaborative at the Local Media Association like 3 or so years ago, I kind of thought this could be the time to update it. That there were potentially opportunities out there to actually make a difference. So what I mean by that is when I did my book back then, I talked a little bit about philanthropy and advertising, but now I knew that there was a lot more philanthropy potential. And I started the idea of this project way before I got my current job at Press Forward Chicago, but I did know about the landscape changing, where philanthropy was starting to realize that community voices and local news was being lost, and with that was being lost a lot of the checks that we need, the checks and balances that media provide on that local level, whether it's about LGBT rights, African American social justice, or it's about our tax bills, right? We need local media watching it. So I kind of knew there was a moment in time where this would make a difference, and maybe there's something that we can do to help bring more sustainability to LGBTQ media.
There's so much involved in this project. How did you know where to start? What was your research process?
Well, the good thing is I have been in LGBT media for 41 years. And then when I did the book, I did a tremendous amount of research over a year and a half. So I had that starting point. And because I for like 3 or 4 years wanted to do this. Every time I saw a new media outlet or a new idea, a new research, I just put it in a folder, a digital folder. And so I had that to start with. And then we also went out and asked people to give us their own resources. So Rivendell Media, Press Pass Q, folks that are in News is Out, and others shared that we were working on this. But even then, I mean, we knew that there was a potential that more would be uncovered and more would be starting. And so the map can be updated. It's meant to be a living document, and we've added some since then. Some of the difficulties were defining local versus national, especially when it comes to marginalized press. So in the end, we ended up switching a couple back and forth based on what they wanted to identify as. They didn't find themselves on the map, and we're like, that's because you say you're a national publication. So the map is for the local, but we have the national listed elsewhere. So there was a little definition issue on that. And I think the next thing that I would have wanted to accomplish and maybe that can come long term is that there's all these other kinds of things in influencers and creators out there that are doing Substacks and other types of things that really are not in any way what's seen as traditional media, but they're media adjacent and they also have the potential to move into a more multi-sourced objective type of news media. So I think those are things that we try to be a little inclusive on the podcast side and some others as long as there was not like a fully opinion site. And so that's what's exciting is that because of the cost of entry into media these days compared to 1984, so many more people can have their voices heard.
What were some of the major findings that should be at the top of our list of what we are aware of?
Well, that there are massive gaps. Medill University does Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University does a news desert study, and that's on more of the mainstream media, although they include some gay media. This kind of does it on a higher level for LGBTQ media, and we found 18 states that don't have any, specific LGBTQ plus media. But even that is kind of a tip of the iceberg because in many states you might have one media outlet and they might be regional to a city. So the whole rest of the state isn't getting covered. And even if it's a statewide one, it may not be able to cover all the gaps within their state. I think the Buckeye Flame does a phenomenal job being a statewide organization, but boy, could he use a lot more resources to do it even better. So there are so many gaps in places that don't have LGBTQ plus coverage. And a decade ago, people started to say, well, is there still a need for LGBTQ media? It's so many advances. Well, first of all, we all know that history is not a one-directional thing, that oftentimes it swings backwards, and we have swung so far back. We are so much more strong than we had ever been before. So I think we at least have that. We're not going back, we hope, to the 1950s, except, of course, with trans people, there's just devastating losses and policy changes. But so there's more of a need than ever. And we document in the report some of the trans specific media, as well as kind of the national alliances that are coming out in trans media, which I think are vital. I think that's going to be a growth area, necessary growth area in the next few years.
Now, was there any data, and you've seen firsthand a lot of, changes over the last decade, even. Was there anything that surprised you from coming out of this mapping project?
Yes, I did not know how shoestring the vast majority of these outlets are today, including some of the national ones that are very small budget and volunteer and small staffed. It's pretty tenuous. It's a spider web that needs strengthening, but each strand of that, I'm worried about, right? Like that we really need to get some resources into these outlets that are one or two in a state because it's kind of the national advertising has imploded for a couple of reasons. One is that national advertising into local media was crashing because of Facebook and Google and social media. Layer on that the crash of DEI and diversity marketing, it's a two-pronged killer of local LGBTQ plus media. And most advertising has been at that local level. So Rivendell Media has definitely seen a decline as the main representative of local media. So there needs to be somehow a reversal of that and a figuring out of that advertising thing. But philanthropy is also needs to be part of the equation, as well as small donations and events. And basically the diversification of revenue is critical because we don't want to be single point failure on another thing. Advertising was a single point failure for most LGBTQ media over the last 30 years. When it declines, they decline. We need diversity of revenue, especially small donors from the communities that they're serving. So we need to do some training, some growing of newsletter lists. We need to really strengthen LGBTQ media and not try to make it all about philanthropy or all about anything.
Now, with the results of this mapping project, where do we go from here? What are our very next steps? What are our long-term steps?
So I think each outlet's going to have to have their own kind of reckoning on that, like what's right for them in their market. Some of us are in stronger markets. Some of us have staff. Some of us don't. So not everything's one size fits all in that solution. But I know that local media association and News is Out are trying to get more resources to do fundraising and other kind of financial resource training, grant writing, asset mapping. So if you're in an area that maybe you don't think has a lot of potential support for you, can we map the assets that are there for you now? Are there funders that fund arts and culture, for example, that can be convinced that LGBTQ media covers those areas and they should be funded? So we want to do more trainings. I think a lot of folks feel like they're, trees in a forest with nobody looking. And we want to make sure they feel like they're part of a network and that they have resources and trainings available. Now, with trainings, in my mind, you need to give stipends and value people's time. And you need to realize that training has to come with capacity building too. I've been in a lot of training cohorts over the years where I've seen it where they say, oh, here's how you do all these things. Here's how you do all this newsletter growth. And then at the end of it, you're like, but I don't have anybody to do it, even if you showed me how. So what I'm doing in Press Forward especially is making sure that, yes, we can do the trainings at a high level for those who have capacity. But for those who do not have capacity, the first few months have to be doing it alongside you, doing it for you in some cases, and then weaning off to see where you should see the return on investment. Newsletter growth is probably the thing I talk about the most. It's the one space where we own and control our destiny. If you have 3,000 newsletter subscribers versus 30,000, there's a massive difference in how you can fundraise from that, get people to go to events, and especially sell advertising. Websites are dying on traffic because of AI and because Google using AI in particular and algorithm changes. So yes, websites are important for our content, but we need something to link to that content that we control. And one thing we do not control is social media and their algorithms. And even if you have 20, 30,000 followers on Facebook, you still have to pay to reach them, which is ridiculous because you paid to get them. So we need to use the tools we can to grow our own audiences. Our owned audiences are primarily in newsletter spaces these days. And even with the sale of TikTok, there's no guarantee that's going to continue to drive traffic. So that's my main mantra is grow your newsletter audience through whatever means possible, even if it is through social media advertising. Once you get their email, it's in your universe. And that's something that I'd love to have resources for local media association to train up and help LGBTQ media grow their audiences in their local areas.
Tracy, on a personal note, journalist to journalist, media person to media person, queer person to queer person, you've done so much for the media community and everything that you've done in your book and now this mapping project. What kind of legacy do you want to create as a journalist with your body of work?
I feel so fortunate that I was able to find this lane to work in. There are many things that people sacrifice their lives for, so I'm not being a martyr here at all. I feel lucky. I will have horrible Social Security because I hardly got paid, right? But I have absolutely no regrets because I have been able to see on a local level the impact that LGBT journalism has. I never played in the national space very much, although I did co-vice chair the gay games when it came to Chicago, because it was Chicago, but I never tried to do it outside this geographic area. So I have felt very rewarded and awarded for this work. I feel no regrets, very respected and awarded. But I know there are so many of people like me that have been toiling and doing this in smaller towns and less acknowledged in places across the country. So I'm hoping with this mapping project, with the books that I've done, that it kind of gives the seeds for the next generation to know their history. One of our newest people that works in Windy City Times, Jake Whittick, he has said that yesterday I was meeting with him about what they're going to do next year at the paper, because I've kind of turned over the reins. And he said that he had read my book, Gay Press, Gay Power, when he was in college.
Wow.
And I thought, I don't know how many people saw that book. I self-published for the most part because I'm not patient with the publishing industry. So the fact that anybody is seeing the books I've done means that it was worth it, because you only have to get to 3% of a generation to make sure your history is carried on. My people, when I was in my 20s and I was worried about our history, most of my friends were not. In your 20s, you don't think about it, or even in your 30s. But I was documenting and making sure there was that trail. In that days, it was paper. Now it's digital, which is actually more risky. So I feel like I have given those kernels for the next generation to find their ancestors. Many of those folks never had kids. So it's up to our community to make sure to tell those stories. They don't necessarily have biological progeny, but they have our community progeny. And so that's what I'm hoping someone like you, a younger generation, and Jake and other people are able to find those legacy folks and carry it on. In Gay Press, Gay Power, I had several legacy people that were in there that hadn't really had their story told, certainly not in book form. So I'm hoping that maybe someday someone does a documentary out of that book and does other things, because most of the people who were our pioneers are still around. Henry Gerber is not from 1924. The first known gay publication came out of his organization, but a vast majority of the people that were pioneers in LGBT media are available, right? So let's make sure we give them their honors now and make sure their stories are told.
Tracy, it's such an honor to chat with you, and the mapping project is such an amazing tool, and all the hard work that went into it. So just wrapping up, what is your message to the LGBTQ plus media industry?
Well, one thing I certainly want to say, Alex, thank you. And I'm so glad that the LA Blade is continuing. Obviously, we lost in Troy a true media pioneer as well.
Yes.
So thank you for continuing Troy's legacy. We need to get this message out beyond LGBTQ media. We need the mainstream funding community, the mainstream academic world, and others to really bring some supports to this niche, just like we need it for African American media, for Latino media, for Asian media, for disability media. All of this is so vital and important. Maybe most important right now is supporting trans media, because they are literally being erased by our Congress and by others. And so it's so important. So just subscribe. Even if you don't have any money, subscribe to their newsletter, because every one person they have on that newsletter shows a funder or an advertiser that what they're doing matters. So $0 you have, that's okay. Sign up. Once in a while, kick in $5 or $50, whatever you got, to your local LGBTQ media or your national media, and it really will make a difference. So that our community needs to stand up, and our allies need to stand up more than they ever have before.
What a powerful message to come into the new year with. Thank you so much for chatting with me. And again, thank you for everything you do for the community.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Before we wrap, we want to thank our partners who made this series possible. The LGBTQ Media Mapping Project is supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at City University of New York, Local Media Association, and News is Out. Their backing helped bring this research and podcast to life. Learn more about the Media Mapping Project at newsisout.com. Special thanks to Ken Schneck of the Buckeye Flame for letting us use his podcast platform, and to Alexander Rodriguez for guiding today's conversation, and of course, Tracy Baim. And thank you for listening. Your time and attention help keep this work moving. We'll see you on the next episode of The Map of Us.